Can we talk about kitty cats?
Yes, please. I love kitty cats.
I got to see some baby kittens yesterday. I was at a big coffee festival, and our new cat cafe that we have in town, Wired Whisker, had some kitties there. Have you been to Wired Whisker yet?
I've not been to Wired Whisker. Also, did you say a coffee convention?
Yeah, it was a coffee, like all our local roasters. I could have probably drank about 17 cups of coffee if I'd wanted to, but I kept myself to like 5 samples.
Okay, so Wired Whisker, Kitty Cat Cafe in Duluth. Mm-hmm. Tell me more about your experience with little kittens.
So I got to see the little kittens, and I kept being told by everyone I was with that I needed to take one of them home with me, but as you know, I have a grumpy old cat who would never forgive me if I brought a kitten into the house. So
she very much would not.
I'll have to wait on that. All of your cats have been very wild, and I think she's just kind of over it.
Oh, man. Yeah, that's awesome. So you're not taking a kitten home? Is that what I'm getting from this?
So I'm not taking a kitten home, no. And this was also kind of a huge tangent to bring us around to. The reason why I bring this up is because we're both cat lovers, and I stumbled upon some research, and that research is called The Pet Effect and Trans People, Associations Between Living with Animal Companions and Well-Being. And
I mean, I do get a lot of well-being from living around animals.
Well, that's the thing that I really want to talk about is like, I feel that way too. And I don't know if that's because we're cat people, but what the research shows is that in particular in this study of trans people living in New Zealand, Australia, the UK, and the US, that there is a measurable difference in psychological distress for trans individuals who have a pet in their family. And I want to explore that a little bit with you because I think that's already how we feel, but it's really cool that the research is showing that.
Yeah, well, okay, so to the audience listening, sorry to bring the mood down a little bit. My cat, unfortunately, did pass away recently, and it has been a major loss in our family, but it is wild to just see how much, I've worked through a lot of the grief that came with that, but just not having that extra support here has been wild to me of I know I'm an animal lover, I love animals, but it feels even more than that of I know so many animal lovers who don't have animals at home for one reason or another. And for me, it's right. No, this is a family member that I am missing right now. It's like having a tiny little child running around that I don't have anymore. And so I definitely feel this way about needing a pet there. And I will also say just in my own experiences, Nova, my cat before, was always there throughout my transition, had been there throughout everything, had helped me deal with a lot of dysphoria and everything. I cannot tell you how many times I have cried, I had cried into her, she was there for me. And so I really do believe that this makes a lot of sense.
It does make a lot of sense. Well, just here's a creature that loves you unconditionally, regardless of what you do, what you say, who you are. These critters are, and I think especially, again, as people who are very kind to our critters and, put a lot of attention and thought and do treat them like family. And a quote from this research says, in particular, having animal companionship as a counter for the negative effects of living in cisgenderist contexts, which I found really interesting as well. Because again, the time you're spending with that animal can work outside of constructs. And, I just think that that's huge. We need that time in our lives. I think about that again in just sort of from an anxiety, depression, standpoint as well of I've needed that pet time in order to escape from all the social constructs that make my brain hurt.
Exactly. Yeah. Something that I was also thinking about in this is how important pets have been to people learning about gender identity and stuff. I know for myself, I use pets as pets don't care what pronouns or name you use for them, so you can be oh yeah, that's my cat, Faye uses fair pronouns or something like that. So I think in that way too of being able to project your own experiences onto your pets a little bit in how you talk about them and okay, I want to see how these pronouns feel to use on somebody who isn't me, because maybe I'm not safe to come out yet, or maybe I'm not certain that this is a pronoun I want to use and I don't want to make other people have to relearn or whatever. And so this is so fascinating, and I found it
fascinating too.
I really enjoy that it's breaking down the cis narrative.
I think that's important. Well, and I think in particular cats, again, our affinity, have been vilified by society, have been, sort of put alongside, witches and in ways that you and I find absolutely wonderful, and just charming, and just adds to our affinity for them. What I want to say from that is, if you're feeling down and you have the opportunity to have a pet in your life, I think I'd encourage you to do that. If you're indifferent about cats, we certainly love cats. And I think the other thing I'll add at this point is if you're thinking about adopting an animal, please do so from an animal shelter. So that there are many animals who need your love and support out there, and buying them, which is very expensive and can be a little sketchy in sourcing, is just not the way that we would encourage you to find your next animal.
And also, please, if you are not in a strong financial situation, we're not encouraging you to put yourself at risk by taking on an animal. We want to make sure that all the animals in your life are cared for and that you yourself are also cared for here. Animals are lovely, they are wonderful, but they can also be very stressful. And so just be aware of that too.
Absolutely.
Hi, we're Raven, a transgender system.
And I'm Cam, your dad.
And this is The Transgender, a podcast chronicling our transition.
And a cisgender man learning how to support it.
We are almost done, and I'm so sad about it, giving talks to a local hospital, Aspirus St. Luke's, about how to work with trans patients. It has been such a cool and amazing experience. And I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the questions that we got, because I think it's really cool and important.
If you want to get a little insight into what we've been doing, I did post, we were interviewed by our local Fox station at the site of one of our trainings last week. And so I just posted that to our Facebook account. So take a look at that. You can see our smiling faces and what we did.
It's very fun. One of the questions that we got, though, was specifically about one of the people who was in the audience about their kiddo. And they said that their kiddo has now expressed a couple of times about wanting to be a different gender. And they had some questions about that of what do I, do? What do I say? How do I encourage this? But also I'm a parent. And so how do I work, in this kind of situation? And something that came up during that conversation was, but they really like toys that are typically associated with their gender assigned at birth. And I'm being very cautious.
The examples were Pokemon, which, I think I know an equal number of female presenting people who enjoy Pokemon as well as male. But this is a kindergartner we're talking about. So I can see particularly at that age, that being associated more as a boys sort of thing. But anyway, go on.
Yeah. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what do you do if you have a kiddo or another trans person in your life who maybe enjoys and participates in things that are associated more with the gender that they were assigned at birth. And Cam, I kind of want to hear from you. When I was growing up, what was I like? Was I playing with trucks and that? Was I playing with dolls? Was I playing in the woods with sticks? I mean, I know that one's true, but
yes, that was definitely true and carries on to this day.
True. If you ever meet me in the woods, you can be assured that I will have at least 7 sticks on me.
So the answer to your question is, I think I always just kind of, and I've done this with Ollie as well, my 8-year-old, is kind of take your lead on the things that you're interested in. And certainly I think early on, you were interested in toys that your peers were interested in or that were being advertised to you specifically in a gendered way. So, you had a lot of Hot Wheel cars.
Yeah.
You were, though, really interested in digging and sticks. And so I say, you had the sort of Tonka Trunky, those types of things, but I don't think it had anything to do with your personal interest in trucks. It was just you wanted machines that could make the dirt get up, dig that dirt up.
Yeah, I was very much a child who enjoyed being outside and, digging around in the dirt.
Which is hilarious because your little brother is very different. I brought him out to Gooseberry Falls, and he was so terrified about the bugs that was the whole hike was just dealing with, and there were a lot of bees out, but they weren't bothering us. He was very worried about that. And so his outdoor experiences are very different than yours. But all that to say, again, and so I can look at him as well and say, I think again, there is somewhat of a bias towards what we might label as boy toys, but I'm finding that's less and less. He seems more interested in more gender neutral things and is really mostly interested in like fidgets and especially like colorful rainbow, things that he can have around that don't feel particularly. And so my question, I think, is, are toys becoming more gender neutral now? Or is that just something I'm experiencing in my world with this kiddo?
I think that's something you're just experiencing. But I will say, what I have seen at least is people are degendering toys themselves. Advertisers are still very much like, oh, we're going to advertise Paw Patrol to boys and whatever, and we're gonna have like a girl Paw Patrol who's like, in the thing. Don't worry about why Paw Patrol's on the mind. I've been watching a lot of documentaries about propaganda.
I love that.
It's great. It's lovely. And so I think that advertisers are still trying to like really push this narrative of like, boy toys are these things and girls can only play with these things. And it's
I think I experienced that most recently. You walk through Target and there's one row in the toy section that is just pink, and there's one row in the toy section that's just blue. And then everything else is sort of a mishmash, right? But so I do find that interesting.
Yeah. And, so when it comes to trans kids in specific, it's very hard as a trans person to talk about this in a way that isn't then going to be framed as like, oh, well, you're trying to convert our kids or something like that.
Right.
And so I want to be very careful about what I say here, but I also want to like be honest of saying like trans people are not trying to convert your kids. We're trying to allow trans kids to live the lives that they want. But something that's really important to me as a trans person when it comes to like kiddos is I want to ensure that they are having the most fun with whatever toys they want. And so if a kid comes up to you and let's say that, he was assigned male at birth, he uses he, him pronouns, and he's playing with dolls. If that's bringing him joy, I want that for him all day long. Like, go play with I will sit down and play house with you if that's what you want, whatever.
And don't make any assumptions based on that, right?
Exactly.
I mean, you don't know anything about the gender of that child based on their affinity for playing with dolls. It's just not, that's the biggest piece, I think, for me.
Now, if that boy was then like, I want to be called a girl, I want to like, whatever, all of this, that's when then maybe you should start having some conversations, not just with your child, which I highly encourage, but also conversations with other trans parents, people who are parents of trans kids about like, what does this mean? I encourage you to talk to your doctor about like what developmentally is, like where are they at in the current stage? A 6-year-old doesn't have a fully developed brain, as we know. And so like, I encourage you to have those conversations and also listen to your kid. If your kid is saying, I want to be a girl, learn more about that. What does that mean for them? Does that mean that they want to wear dresses? Does that mean that they want to use she, her pronouns? Does that mean they want to use a different name? Or does that mean that they just want to experience life as a girl and like be called a girl, but also use he, him pronouns, use their old name? Like, that's okay too. It's just part of life. And I will say for kids especially, everything is very reversible. Within your own abilities and within your own capabilities of like finances and stuff, I encourage you to help them explore that. If they're like, I want to wear dresses, get them a dress. See if that helps like make them feel better. And if it doesn't, that's okay. It's like $20 at most for a dress for a kiddo, I think. Yeah, that's $20 that you're out, but kids are also growing fast anyways. And so what harm is there in buying one article of clothing that they may or may not enjoy, So when we're talking about kids playing with different toys and enjoying different things, it's very difficult to make those assumptions. And it's all about having conversations with your kids. If you are like, hey, I see you playing with dolls a lot more, is that something that you like to do? Do you feel like you have to do that? Like something like that. Like, I know when I was a kid, I felt pressured into learning all about masculine things myself, and not by Cam necessarily, but just by like societal pressures.
Yeah.
And so ask your kid, like, do you want to try another toy? And be very open about that. Kids can see that the world is very binary and, isn't very accepting to different people. And so try and encourage that as much as you can if you're noticing that your kids sometimes are a little bit different.
And can I talk quick about those societal standards around these things? Because I think it's worth noting a couple of things. One, we talked about extensively in a past episode, but this pink versus blue conversation and how you might want to fight off some transphobia with actual historical knowledge, is worth noting that until the 1930s, pink was considered a masculine color.
Yep.
And then in the 1930s and 40s, there was just some like marketplace switching and preferences were changing. And then what ended up happening was our capitalist society decided to reinforce and really plant a peg in and say, we're going to make this a girly color and we're going to, make everything pink and market it towards girls and make everything blue and market it towards boys. It seriously is just a marketing tactic as opposed to, just think about it for a second. For what other reason would we be assigning color to a boy or a girl? I mean, there's really no other. Our Neanderthal ancestors were not like, oh, pink, that girl color.
Pink girl color. Rosy skin girl.
But what I do want to say is, going back to our Neanderthal ancestors, toy development was largely around practicing domestic arts associated with your gender. So girls would be given things that had to do with cooking or dolls so that they could practice caring for a baby. And boys were given tools to, and so absolutely historically, the means by which those toys had some purpose in the world came largely from domesticating us towards certain types of gender role chores in our world. All of that to say, now we live in a society where it's really acceptable for men to cook and women to work. And so all this shit needs to be thrown out the window, I guess, is probably what I'm saying. Because it's all constructs. None of it really matters.
Take all your kids' toys, throw them out the window. You don't need them anymore.
Rocks and sticks. That's what we're encouraging. Those are the most gender neutral toys possible.
I'm kidding. But genuinely, like, if you are really trying to be trans inclusive and you're trying to help your kid explore what their gender means, how they exist in this world, I encourage you to really just try and explore, figure out what your kid likes, what they don't like, and keep talking with them. Like, I know that seems so simple to a lot of us, but for so many people, it's like, well, I can't talk to my kid. My kid is a child. Like, how can I talk to them? And so I encourage you to just talk to them and see what they like, because kids are very smart.
So maybe this is a good segue towards our main topic, and that is how we have gendered sports in our world.
Oh God.
In a similar way to toys. And I know sports is not really Raven and my thing. I would say I was a soccer player and a runner in high school and still run, but it's hard for me to say I'm not a sporty person by any means.
This episode is made possible with support from Motive Physical Therapy. If you're dealing with pain or injury, or just want to know if you're doing the right exercises for your body, you need to check out Motive PT. They deliver high-impact physical therapy and movement training, and it's all virtual. This means you get to do your physical therapy wherever you are, making it easy and fun to get stronger and back to the things you love doing. What I love about Motive PT is how they customize everything to you. You meet online with Dr. Alex for your first assessment, and then get a daily exercise calendar with unlimited video check-ins, all included and all virtual. No more driving to and from the clinic. You can do your PT wherever works for you. Plus, knowing Motive PT is part of the LGBTQ community can make all the difference in feeling understood and supported. Don't wait. Head over to motivept.com to start your journey. That's motivpt.com. Motive PT, wellness where you are.
But
we're not sitting down and watching football on the weekends or anything like that,
And no judgment to anybody who does.
No judgment.
That's just not our thing. We're too busy watching Paw Patrol to. No, wait.
Propaganda documentaries.
Yes. So I just we have the Summer Olympics in Paris was just a little bit ago. And so I really want to talk about transphobia in sports, and in particular, sort of this history of the Olympics. So if you don't mind me just kind of jumping into some information, and then let's see what we think about it.
Absolutely. Please do.
So this is an extremely recent conversation around acceptance of trans folks, but I did read an article saying that trans exclusion from the Olympics may have actually been tied to Nazism and the German Olympics. And I don't have a lot of information on that, but really ingrained in society due to those types of bigoted standpoints, but really was not fully addressed or adopted by the International Olympic Committee until 2021.
Yeah. Well, I know that for a while, at least. I think since at least early 2000s, if not before, trans athletes had been accepted in the Olympics and to compete in their own, the gender that they identify with. But
not in the Olympics, though. 2021 was the first year that the International Olympic Committee allowed anyone who was out as a trans person to be certified to compete.
Really?
There have been a number of international bodies. And so this was an interesting part of my research, because there have been a number of international bodies that over the last decade have been building up to this and being accepting of trans athletes. But it wasn't until Laurel Hubbard was accepted as a weightlifter to compete in the 2021 Olympics in Tokyo that we really saw the first time that this was accepted in policy by the Olympic Committee.
That's wild. It really took that long? Oh, man.
And again, you're working. I mean, I'm not going to justify anything the International Olympic Committee is doing because, I think a lot of these larger bodies are pretty shady. But one of the things they're up against is this is a worldwide organization with representatives from lots of different countries who have very different laws and cultural beliefs and religious beliefs around gender that, it has literally taken this long for them to actually, I would say, have the courage maybe to say, honestly, the international community is taking a stance towards equality.
Well, and
here.
So this is so funny. This is so funny because I think back to just even a couple of years in the recent history of chess banning trans athletes from participating and,
and what does that have to do with physicality of people,
it's all just transphobia. And so it's mildly upsetting to me that it was 2021 that the first trans athletes were accepted in the Olympics. I had honestly thought it was longer than that.
Well, and that was why I wanted to go down this road because we heard so much this last year. But let me call out a couple other athletes that I think, really have paved the way. So that same year, 2021, which, sorry to bring it up, that was actually the 2020 Olympics that had been canceled because of the pandemic. So anyway, if the years don't necessarily line up with what you're thinking for Olympics, just a reminder, that's what happened in Tokyo.
The COVID happened.
The COVID really, put a little pause on things. So BMX rider Chelsea Wolfe was also among the first out trans women to compete in the Olympics. Quinn is a trans non-binary footballer, and Elena Smith is a non-binary skateboarder who also competed that year. Quinn is somebody who, if I had more time right before we started recording, and I'm going to, is a rabbit hole of wholesomeness that is really cool. Quinn went on in 2023 to become the first trans soccer player in the FIFA World Cup.
That's insane. What I thought FIFA was really bad at trans athletes.
They are really bad as an organization.
I mean, FIFA's just really bad, but yeah.
But this was huge. So then the other thing worth noting, and I want to talk about Chris Moser mostly because he is a trans man qualified to compete in the 2021 Olympics and then in the 2024 Olympics, didn't compete that year due to injury. And so also is in this list, and I wanted to bring this up because Chris also runs the transathlete.com website, which is a phenomenal source for
that is a phenomenal source.
Where world politics are at right now and how the Olympics are changing, and has been a huge advocate for trans rights in sports. So just a big shout out to Chris for his wonderful work.
Thank you, Chris.
So lastly, I just want to talk about trans and non-binary athletes that competed this year. We saw the return of Quinn. Footballer, to soccer.
I do not pay attention to sports that much, but soccer and hockey are two things that you passed on to me, Cam, that I do enjoy watching.
Sorry about that. They're fun.
They're fun. They are fun. What team does Quinn play for?
So Quinn plays for Canada, our upstairs neighbors.
Hell yes. Okay. No, I am full in. I am on the Quinn train. Quinn, you are my favorite.
Let's see if we can get Quinn on the podcast. That would rule.
That would be awesome.
So then two others that I wanted to point out. Amazing athletes, 1,500 meter runner Nikki Hiltz and shot putter Raven Saunders.
It's
So,
me.
It's you, shot putter.
I'm a shot putter. I'm not. I suck at sports. That's cool though. Raven Saunders, awesome.
Yeah.
And Nikki
So
Hiltz.
just cool people that I wanted to bring up. What I also want to bring up was really uncool people, and that is the laundry list of transphobic celebrities and politicians who decided that cisgender women were going to be a target this year in the Olympics, and I think really dominated the news much more so than celebrating trans people who were competing in a way that I think felt especially targeted and horrific to these cis women as well. And so I just really want to talk about that as an important part of this conversation as well.
Please, yes. This is why I stopped watching the Summer Olympics this year. Was because it was just gross. There was so much transphobia.
There was so little that you could watch where this was not one of the topics that kept getting brought up in just, again, this really misogynistic in particular way. But also, I want to point out as well, as a lot of much more well-researched commenters have said, this also has a lot to do with white supremacy as well.
Yes.
And our ideals around feminism in white supremacist culture. Both of the women that have been targeted are from countries that are not typically considered Caucasian. And so those two are both boxers. They include Mamem Khalif, who is a gold medal winner from Algeria, and Lin Wu-Ting, who is a gold medal winner from Taiwan. Part of the reason why they were specifically targeted, well, one, because they're really fucking good at their sport and compete at the highest levels. But they were, in recent years, both disqualified by the International Boxing Association due to some unspecified gender eligibility test that they received from that association. Since then, again, kudos to International Olympic Committee. They did decertify the IBA, so they are no longer any kind of standard for international boxing when it comes to the Olympics, and I think that's outstanding.
That's excellent. Listen, the Olympic Committee has done a lot of horrible things, and I will give them kudos for this. They did one good thing.
One good thing. And I just hope, where I want to see all the vitriol come to in this whole conversation is support for trans athletes at this international competition level, because I think that is what's going to show the world that your high school trans kid who wants to play in their gender has the right to do that, and the international community embraces it. I just think this is where the larger conversation, and I think those countries that are even more transphobic than the United States might start coming around as the international community begins to rally. So that's why I wanted to bring all this up, is that I don't want another 4 years to go by and we're having the same stupid conversation that's so misogynistic and awful.
Which we will. We absolutely will. It's been happening for years, but let's hope that it just keeps getting better and better. And, one thing that I want to talk about before we kind of move on to our last big update here is trans people in sports is not a new phenomenon either. We always talk about how, trans people aren't new. Trans people in sports is also not new. Trans people have been competing in sports for a very, very long time. And I've had a lot of conversations with people, especially women who, were born and were in school before women's sports really were a big thing. And I just want to say, why do we even have different gendered competitions? None of it makes sense to me. And I don't understand sports enough to really be able to argue articulately about this. But I really just think nothing in sports makes sense. And I think that all of this is fairly arbitrary. Let trans people compete in whatever gender they say that they are, because it really doesn't matter that much.
Really doesn't. At the end of the day, it's a game.
And
I realize it's a really important game at this level, and this is people's careers and livelihoods. And there's a lot of complexities, but at the end of the day, we need to support equality and trans rights. And so I hope our listenership is going to help us fight for that right, even if you're not that big into sports, like we are not that big into sports.
Yes.
Let me though, I want to give one more update. And this is just because it's kind of a personal thing for me, something that, I worked alongside my colleagues at Gender Justice and got to grant right towards the work that's being done on this case. So to bring you up to speed, USA Powerlifting banned transgender powerlifter JC Cooper from competitions. They're a Minnesotan. And our friends at Gender Justice took up their case to represent them in court along with their legal partners. And What came of that is that in February 2023, the district court decided that JC was being discriminated against. And in 2024, the Minnesota Appeals Court affirmed that discrimination of athletes based on gender violated the Minnesota Human Rights Act. So those are two big wins.
Awesome. Yeah, those
in this
are
conversation.
huge wins.
What wasn't a big win is that court decided to also send the case back to district court to determine whether or not JC themselves had been discriminated against specifically because she is trans. So fast forward to this summer. This is a great big update because the Minnesota Supreme Court has announced that they are going to hear the case. And
awesome.
What this has, and it looks like you never know, but the decision looks to be favorable for JC. That has major implications for trans athletes, not just in Minnesota, but Supreme Courts in various states look at, decisions made by other Supreme Courts in determining, the case law. And so having a decision like that on the books is just really vital to the legal implications that come along with these conversations around discrimination in sports. So what I want to say is, thank you, JC. This is really hard work to be a plaintiff for years and years and years and to be called in for testimony and have to fight for your own rights and everyone's rights. And so, I just am so proud of her and my friends at Gender Justice who they're relentless. They will not let this up. They're going to make sure that the right decision is made here. So if we hear any more coming up, I will let you all know.
And thank you to JC and Gender Justice. This is setting a course for good in the world, and especially in Minnesota. Gender euphoria time.
Ooh,
we've reached the end of the podcast here. Can you believe it? It's been a wild ride. Today's Gender euphoria comes from Laura D. And Laura says, one that really hits hard for me is being complimented about literally anything that I wear nowadays that I absolutely wouldn't have worn 5 years ago out of pure fear. I am much more expressive with my outward appearance these days, and as a result, I seem to receive far more compliments on the things that I do to affirm my own gender, and it is just so heartwarming. And I love to hear that, Laura. Oh, it's so good to hear that. I hope that every day you are living your best life.
And I will say, as it's been a little while since we've had an episode out, we've seen a sharp decline in gender euphorias being sent our way.
Yes.
So if you have a gender euphoria, please shoot it over to us because we're starting to run through our backlog and are looking for more. So send it along.
And we should hopefully be getting episodes out more frequently here. It's been a rough couple of months over here at our households.
At Transgender HQs.
At Transgender HQ.
But we're getting that fall energy in, so expect more from us. If you have questions about transitioning or supporting someone who is transitioning and you'd like us to talk about it on the show, please shoot an email to questions@transgendapod.com, click the chat with us button on our website, or DM us on social media. And if you'd like to support the show, and thank you for wanting to support the show, you can become a patron on our Patreon.
Shout out to some of our new free tier patrons. By the way, we have a free tier on our Patreon to Goddess Queen, Muhammad, Lucy, and FB. Thank you so much for your support. And be sure to check out our episode description for links to resources on today's topics. I personally am going to go read that study on the pet effect of transgender people. That sounds super cool. And you guys are great.
You are great. And thanks for listening. I've been Cam.
We've been Raven.
And this has been The Transgender.
Love you all, except the bigots.